I'm Mike Govoni, and for the last 15 years, I've been in recovery from addiction and on the deepest quest to find healing, to experience my own unique wholeness beyond the story of what happened to me. By taking an integrative, holistic approach to experience transformation, I bring you the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast, a show dedicated to people in recovery who are looking for deeper healing and transformation. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast. I'm really excited to bring you today's episode with licensed clinical social worker and conscious relationship coach, Cassandra Solano. I first met Cassandra in a personal development workshop that we were both attending as newbie entrepreneurs doing our own personal work so we could step into our purpose supporting others on their healing journey. One thing of many that I really appreciate about Cassandra is her transparency to share her own personal struggles and trauma to inspire others on their journey to heal. I love her down-to-earth presence and humble spirit. In her genuine way, she shares her message and work with the world. Another big reason I wanted to bring this conversation with her to your ears is I know personally how difficult it can be for us who are in recovery to have healthy, thriving relationships, specifically intimate relationships. I know I personally struggled in relationship for a long time, living out old patterns, and it was causing me a lot of harm and others. So getting this insight and this information, wherever you are in your process, whether you're in a relationship or not in a relationship, is really important. And I can say if I had it years ago, I may be in a different place, but I'm happy where I am today. And after doing a lot of work, including a lot of relationship stuff, it's paid off. So I hope this conversation will help you and it will shed some light on what a conscious relationship is all about and how to support you to create one for you and your partner. If you have one, like I say, if not, if you're single, that's cool too. There's so much info for someone who may be single. I think one of the most important things is just getting to work on what's causing the disruption in the ability to have a connected relationship and know that the trauma that we experienced in our past definitely has something to do with our relationship. So we'll get into that more. And some of the topics Cassandra and I will discuss are, what is a conscious relationship, why it's so common for people to stay in a relationship way longer than they should, and what to do if that's you, how the trauma of our childhood becomes the drama of our adulthood and how you can heal it. What are some of the things you can do if you're in a relationship and you're doing your deep personal work, but your partner is not interested in doing theirs? That's a big one. And also Cassandra shares her own personal journey and tells her story of healing from childhood trauma and what it's like now to be in a loving, committed relationship and some of the steps you can take to begin your journey towards having a thriving conscious relationship for yourself. So, Cassandra is a licensed clinical social worker and conscious relationship coach. She has been counseling since 2006 in various settings, from drug treatment to running a large mental health program, serving the homeless and formerly incarcerated populations. She began in private practice for over a year, serving women and couples online all over the world to identify how their childhood trauma is impacting their adult relationships, to get clarity in the love that they want. She is a sober mom of 3, plus 1 bonus kid, a survivor of childhood emotional abuse, domestic violence, and is remarried after struggling for a decade in her first toxic marriage. She uses a mind-body-spirit approach in helping her clients and enjoys integrating psychology, neuroscience, and spirituality to help her clients transform their lives. Cassandra, welcome to the show. I think what I really admire about you, Cassandra, is you're a professional in your field as a clinical social worker and coach, but also you allow the world to see you as a human being. You're very transparent about some of your struggles and what you've personally had to heal to bring you to the place in the work that you do today with others. So I really appreciate that about you. And, as my mentor brought up the term to me, wounded healers. And I think the real people that are doing the deep work are people that have had to transcend their own suffering and heal their wounds. So I'm a wounded healer. I know you're pretty transparent about some of the things that you've had to heal, that's brought you to be this beautiful gem that you are today. So I want to dive right in by having you maybe share a little bit about your personal journey from addiction to recovery and the struggle you went through specifically in relationship, as much as you'd like to share with the audience, that inspired you to do the work that you do today, supporting others to heal from past trauma and step into conscious relationship.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike. I feel really privileged to be here. So my dad was actually sober. He had gotten sober in 12-step program before I was born. And I always say I had two dads. I had the sober dad and then the dad that relapsed when I was about 10 years old. And we went through some really challenging economic times, and I started to become that parentified kid. My mom was pretty emotionally shut down and not able to provide my dad emotional support because of her own history of trauma. So then my dad started to turn to me for support, even crying to me that he wanted to kill himself when I was 10, 11 years old. So that was just a lot to hold and to carry, and to be aware of how much we were struggling financially, to be aware that I was different than the other kids, having to be in the free lunch line at school because my parents couldn't afford lunch. Um, and to be called, the human garbage disposal in junior high because I would just eat my friends' leftover home lunches because they had cool things like gushers, and my parents couldn't even afford, snacks like that. So I was just perpetually feeling like different and other. I didn't have a lot of emotional support. And then I started to experience incest. I'm an incest survivor. And my parents, I learned later in my adult life, suspected it, but they were so overwhelmed, they couldn't confront it. And so that all kind of went on about the time my dad relapsed. And so there was definitely a lot of emotional trauma there. You know, my dad drinking was a very different person than sober. And I became like the go between for my parents. I was kind of triangulated in their marriage whenever they would fight. So I, in turn, trying to kind of overcompensate, took on that traditional, there in family systems theory, there's a lot of kind of typical roles that kids will take on when there's an alcoholic home or a dysfunctional home. So I became that hero child, thinking, if I can just achieve enough, somehow I could fix things and make it better. This wasn't like a conscious decision, but looking back at it, that's definitely what it was. And I was taking honors classes and I was a varsity athlete. I was volunteering in the community 10 hours a week. Plus, I would work about 10, 15 hours on the weekends so I could afford to buy myself decent clothes. And I was going from 6 a.m. till I think water polo or swim practice would end about 7 p.m. and come home and study. And I ended up with a stress ulcer by the time I was starting my junior year in high school. Just trying to do all the things and compensate for I didn't know what, and trying to get validation and approval because I was not seen and attuned to at home. And then I discovered partying. I didn't party in high school with the high school kids, but a friend of mine from the swim team said, "Hey, let's go to this rave in LA." And I'm 16 from the suburbs, and he was a year older than me, and he was an all-star on the swim team, nationally ranked swimmer. So I just had hearts in my eyes for this guy. And I'm okay, sure, let's go. And the first night, everyone's doing this thing called ecstasy. And I'm like, sure, why not? And my best friend went with me and she was like, oh, hell no, I'm not doing drugs. And so it's kind of interesting just to think about even what leads up to that first time that we decide to like try it or try something maybe illegal or something just so new. Because I was so needing like that relief, right? From having to be perfect and be everything to everyone Monday through Friday. So that I became like a raver. This was like the mid 90s. I was all in that like counterculture lifestyle. And honestly, like I feel like, and I don't know if you feel like this, but like drugs saved me for a few years, you know?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like I had started like trigger warning, self-harm, but I had started cutting myself about 11 years old.
Mm.
And that continued off and on till I was about 21. But when I found like drugs in that party scene and that relief at 16, like that really decreased that behavior because I found kind of another outlet, right, to like relieve stress. And I found like a community. So I'm not like saying it all stayed that way like forever and ever.
Mhm.
But for a couple of years there, you know, it was kind of what I had accessible to me. Um, and what I, you know, my parents didn't talk to me about friends, didn't talk to me about boys, didn't talk to me about anything. Um, my off and on high school sweetheart, we had a very toxic relationship. His mom was an alcoholic and my dad was an alcoholic. So we were a match made in hell.
Mhm.
And he,
Yeah,
yeah,
the commonalities that bring us together, are sometimes really destructive, but hey.
totally,
Mm.
totally. And that was like the beginning of like my 20 years of like toxic dysfunctional relationships. Like he sexually assaulted somebody very close to me. And even after like my parents found out about it, like they were still fine with me seeing him. You know, my
Mm.
parents were just so checked out.
Mm.
And then after high school, I ended up going to a junior college. I was on a nationally ranked cheerleading team. My dad would let me have huge parties, and it was like so great. But then I say, like, I peaked at 19. There was like this very short moment of time where like everything was great and I had friends and it was cool. But it still wasn't enough. Like, I still needed to drink more than everybody else. And I would just say, well, it's because I'm tall, it's because I'm Mexican. Like, I need to drink more. I still felt that pervasive sense of loneliness inside, feeling like not good enough, like I didn't fit in. So then, when I was at a party one night, the opportunity came for me to try crystal methamphetamine. I was like, okay, sure, you know, and it was just like whatever was put in front of me, I would take. And that set me on a really steep downhill spiral over the next 3 years that led to um, you know, a very severe domestic violence relationship. I was almost killed on several occasions. Drug trafficking, homelessness, just all kinds of stuff. And if you looked at the girl who graduated high school, like, you know, varsity athlete, I was like queen of my city, you know.
Mm.
I was like very shiny and sparkly on the outside, but inside, you know, I had a lot of trauma
Yeah.
and was just really suffering. So that once I found that drug combined with alcohol, I just like went downhill really hard and fast, and um, ended up having to go to treatment at 21. Well, I told my parents I'm, you know, an addict and I need treatment. But at that point, I wasn't convinced had an alcohol problem, or I didn't understand like that, you know, you could have a problem in your relationship with alcohol too at 21. So after that month of outpatient treatment at Kaiser, I kept drinking for another 8 months, but then I still had that feeling every day like I wanted to die. And I was still constantly struggling in that relationship, trying to control it and enjoy it. And I realized, like, no matter what the substance, I was not going to have like a conscious, healthy relationship with it. So I got sober. at 22 back in 2005. And I was dating somebody who I had met just out of rehab, and he was a blazing codependent at the time. And we ended up getting married when I was about 2 years sober, and I suspected all along the way it wasn't the right decision. But I felt like, well, I'm sober. I got to make up for lost time. I got to show what a responsible person I am and do the right thing. And then that relationship ended up becoming very emotionally abusive. And he turned out to be quite narcissistic. And we have been divorced about 5 years now. And through a lot of therapy, a lot of work, a lot of spiritual help, I've now remarried to an amazing person, and we have such an incredible relationship. We both have past histories of trauma. Him actually more severe than mine in some ways, but we're able to talk about it, and we're able to support each other and communicate and actually help each other heal. So I'm like on this mission now to help people who have a history of trauma learn how to have healthy relationships through teaching healthy relationship skills, but also helping them heal those past wounds that are keeping them, like me going from one unhealthy relationship to the next, or also like me stuck in an unhealthy relationship for way longer than they need to be. Because I really think everyone deserves to be in a healthy relationship, and it just really sucks because of through no fault of your own, because you had trauma growing up, that now you're like, potentially more likely to have unhealthy relationships and to continue to suffer. And I don't think that's fair. So I'm out here on a mission to educate and to support folks. Yeah. So that's kind of my story.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and now that I have heard your story in greater depth here, it really even gives me more of an appreciation for who you are and what you're doing. I can relate to you on so many levels that I know we've had one other conversation besides this right here. And I really feel you. I really understand. And to see who you've become is amazing. And that's why I opened the show with that little blurb, because people want to learn from the people who have gone through their own process. That people want to learn more than ever from those type of people today. I think the days of this patient doctor relationship, if I may say, and therapist, and it's still here. But what's a huge component, as Carl Jung says, he says, you either have to have gone through or going through the process in order to initiate the healing to the patient. Only the wounded heal.
Wow,
And
that's beautiful.
yeah, and it's what's really beautiful is you had to overcome everything here, and of course, you myself, we're still doing our work, but to really step into your gift and your purpose to shine and help other women or couples or people, whatever it may be. We'll get into that a little bit later here, but it's like it's so amazing, and I just want to say thank you for. And one thing I say to people, which sometimes it probably makes them think a little weird, is thank you for your suffering. Like if it wasn't for your suffering, you wouldn't have gotten to where you are today, and it's just really nice. So let's dive in a little bit on the shifting gears to the work that you do with people in conscious relationship. And I know if there's one theme in my practice with my clients who have been in recovery for years, is many, if not all of them, struggle in relationship to some degree. And like you said, it's so important that you believe everyone should have a relationship that they love and they can have someone they trust and grow with, and it's beautiful. And my fiance Evie has been my biggest healer, not in a codependent way, but she has been holding that space. She's been showing me unconditional love, and she's been right there by my side for me to see my own wholeness, and that's really beautiful. So I'm so excited to have this conversation, and I know the listeners are really intrigued. And I want to start by just asking you, how do you define a conscious relationship? So people might be like, what the hell is that?
Yes. Okay. Great question. And I just love hearing you talk about your relationship. I can just hearing your voice, how life supporting and life sustaining and life giving it is.
Mm.
So to me, a conscious relationship is where two people are coming in with some foundational self awareness, commitment to themselves and doing their own work. They don't need each other, right? Like they're each coming in
Mm.
like with something to bring to the relationship, and that they have the communication skills and the presence or mindfulness or self awareness, right, to work through conflict in ways that brings the relationship closer over time. Like you talked about, it's a relationship where there's potential for each person to feel supported and to grow into the best version of themselves. Not because they're dependent on the other person, but
Mm.
because the container and the safety and that nurturing of the relationship itself is like this rich, fertile soil that the person can grow into the best version of themselves from.
Yeah, and I think that's a great key point you made. Not because they're dependent on each other, like you said, they don't need each other. We need each other in the context of needing each other to grow and deepen and things of that nature. But I think what you're saying is we don't need each other in that codependent way.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Like my value, my worth as a human being would not be diminished if, like, knock on wood, my husband came, back from the park with the kids right now and was like, like that's it. I'm out of here. Like, obviously, I'd be devastated and upset, but I wouldn't think like, oh, like I'm not a good enough or I'm not like a worthy person. Like my intrinsic inherent value and worth is not dependent on his opinion of me or how he treats me. If he gets mad at me, I'm like, or something's wrong, it's those moments where it's like, oh my gosh, my partner's upset, my partner's in a bad mood, they're leaving, or what did I
Mm.
do, or
Mm.
like I'm not good enough, right? Where we can be like, I know I'm good enough, I know I'm good with me, and I'm from that place, I'm able to be like, hey, what's going on? Like, did I do something that upset you? Like, you're kind of in a funky mood, and we're able to like not take things so personally because we know, like, obviously we're being open to feedback, but we also know that like my value is not based off of this relationship, which was absolutely the truth for me for 20 years. Like my value and my worth, my identity was all built around my relationships.
Mm. Absolutely. And when you do, I'm speaking with you here. When we do our individual work, and we don't come from that place of codependency, then we don't have to keep, reliving these old patterns that keep us feeling stuck and keep us feeling like if I don't behave a certain way or act a certain way, then this person is going to leave me or not like me or love me. But when we do our deeper work and fall in love with ourselves, I think you're saying so beautifully is that the relationship can be, of two adults and have that reciprocity where we're not, chasing the other or continuing to try to mold into someone else so this can still last or I can hold on to this other person.
Oh, beautiful. And I love that word reciprocity, right? And what I see too, I mean, I don't know, I heard the statistic a long time ago. I used to work in an inpatient substance abuse treatment center like many, many years ago. I was in the field of addiction, and it was like 80 to 90% of recovering alcoholics, or I forget the exact statistic, but are like codependent.
Mm.
And I wager that's true because it's this whole, like, it's all wrapped up together. We can't really like separate it. It's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, what came first, the codependency or the like addiction or the unhealthy relationship to substances, right? To kind
Mm.
of numb or soothe or cope or whatever was happening already. Um, Go ahead.
Absolutely. And it's like, I think what we're bringing to light here for people to understand is that, you use the word seeking relief when you were telling about your drug addiction. I needed relief, and then the stress. Well, what Cassandra was talking about was that's the traumatic activation because of the dysfunction, because of the wounding, And this is why we go to substances. And as David Rico says, he says the untreated traumas of childhood become the dramas of adulthood. So it's like making the correlation between what happened to us specifically in childhood and the traumatic activation we felt, whether it's too much energy in the system, you might say sympathetic arousal, fight or flight, or dorsal vagal shutdown, whatever case may be, is our coping mechanism is to go and take substances for many of us and our listeners, and yet the childhood wounding and the relationship and addiction is all kind of intertwined.
Absolutely. And you don't have to have had these like tremendous horrific things happen to you growing up either, right? You can have had emotional trauma, neglect, and still have had your brain, your nervous system be impacted to where seeking out substances as like that relief or release, like you said, is maybe the only option to you. And so that's what you do. And then over time, an unhealthy kind of dynamic is built there.
For sure. And this leads me to the next question is, many of us grow up in a dysfunctional family in recovery. I'd probably say more than most.
Mm-hmm.
And many people don't know that it's dysfunctional because it's all they've ever known. It's quote unquote normal to them. So my question is, what situations or traumas have some of your clients experienced growing up, but they don't know it's actually trauma until they've come and seen you?
Yeah. So a lot of my clients that come see me, it's really interesting. A lot of them are aware that they have had a narcissistic father, because I think in a lot of what we're reading online, and a lot of the kind of self-help literature that's out there around narcissism really centers on the father, or an alcoholic father. But not all alcoholic fathers are narcissists. A lot of clients come to me and their dad was actually sometimes super loving and super devoted and very attentive. And with these kind of intermittent moments of like rage or disconnection while drinking, right? And what I see a lot actually are clients that experienced emotional neglect with their mothers. And maybe their mothers were also narcissistic, or their mothers just also had a past history of trauma. And they don't realize that things like not having boundaries respected, like having their doors taken off, their diaries read, their phone calls listened to, not being believed, being gaslit. I have a client that she caught her mom listening in on her phone calls in high school, and her mom just looked at her right dead in the eye and said, "No, I wasn't. That's not what you saw." And so like gaslighting, parentification, like in my story, where you are made to feel like you're emotionally responsible for your parent, or maybe you had to take care of siblings at way too young of age, or get a job really young, like I also did at 14, and worry about money, right? These boundaries, these things that like kids shouldn't have to worry about or be aware of, are broken. Other kind of things that are significant of an unhealthy or dysfunctional family system are enmeshment, where again everyone's too close, where maybe the family system is too rigid, and you weren't allowed to have friends outside of your family, or maybe you were embarrassed to have friends come over, or having diffuse boundaries, so not having any boundaries, and your parents were very laissez-faire, like do whatever you want, man, it's cool, but then they didn't give you the guidance and the structure and the support that you really needed from a parent. So these are just some examples of ways that people who come to work with me have unknowingly been raised in dysfunctional or toxic family systems, either with alcoholic, narcissistic, or emotionally immature parents.
Yeah, so many great examples you just gave us. And many people think that trauma is just, sexual abuse or physical abuse or war trauma. And Cassandra is really, painting this beautiful picture to understand that, much of the trauma we experience is emotional neglect, and that, parentification is a huge one, especially for people who are in the recovery community whose parents are addicted and they can't take care of themselves. So the child steps in. I know that's a big thing I've had to personally heal with my mother. So there's a spectrum of wounding and trauma, and it's not always the big T's that you may hear about. It can be very subtle things too, even in infancy. So I think this is really important because as people begin to understand that, wow, some things are wrong here. What is this? And it's people like yourself that are coming out there and saying, yeah, like that's legit. Like what you're experiencing is neglect, and that I'm sorry that happened, but it needs to be addressed if to move forward. So I want to ask you why you think doing your trauma work is vital to having a conscious, healthy relationship.
Mm, yeah. So, well, like the kind of like the quote you shared earlier, like anything that we don't deal with is going to deal with us. It's going to show up in relationships. Our romantic relationships are right the closest to our hearts. They're where we are the most intimate and vulnerable, and where we are gonna get triggered. Like that is just what our intimate romantic relationships are for, in a way, is to trigger the crap out of us, because in those triggers are opportunities to heal and to kind of pull back on that thread and say, okay, why am I so upset right now? Because my partner is like on their phone and ignoring me, and I'm making bids for attention. I'm trying to connect, and they're like not into me, and it's making me so angry, or it's making me think that I should just like go jump off a bridge. Like I'm having these kind of extreme responses inside right now. What is that from? And when we pull back that thread, we're like, oh, this is because when I was little and I would cry, like my parents used the, cry it out technique, right? That was popular for a while. Or my mom was drunk and she would pass out, and I would like need help with my homework, but she was like too tired to help me, and I would panic inside. And so when we are aware of our past traumas and how they impacted us, when we get triggered in the present and we're able to kind of bridge those two experiences, that's where the opportunity is to actually heal that inner child, to heal those past wounds, and to also invite our partners to support us through that process, or go to our therapists or our coaches to support us through that process.
Yeah, beautiful. Well said. Beautiful. And what would you say to people who are in relationship doing their deeper work, but their partner doesn't want to do their work?
Oh, I get asked this question a lot. So keep doing your work. The good news and the bad news is that you can't control your partner. You can't change your partner. And your job is to focus on you and to show up for your half of the relationship that you're responsible for. So that means keep keep on the path of doing your inner work, but also showing up for the relationship could look like setting boundaries. It could look like having hard conversations. It could look like confronting your partner at times, or saying, "Hey, like this is not okay," and being really clear and direct and brave. Because a lot of times that's the part that we want to skip over, right? Like I know I was like this with my ex-husband. I thought if I went to enough silent meditation retreats and hot yoga classes, I could like spiritually transcend his bullshit and it just wouldn't bother me anymore. And then it was, oh, you should read this book, you should try this thing, trying to get all up in his journey and trying to make him see the light. That didn't work. But the part that I was missing was actually, how was I showing up in that relationship? Because I was people pleasing all day long. and I was stuffing down my own needs and my feelings, my emotions, saying yes when I really wanted to say no, like all that stuff, right? And
Mm.
that was actually the part that I was missing. I wasn't showing up fully for my part of the relationship, which is giving that feedback and setting boundaries and communicating. Um, and if we do that, if we're focusing on us and our self care and our healing journey, and we're really showing up full out for the relationship, um, then time will tell. It will be revealed to you in time, sometimes not even that long of time. Clients that come to work with me start focusing on themselves and showing up for their relationships differently through doing some of this hard stuff. And sometimes within just a couple of months are able to see pretty clearly, either me actually just staying in my energy and like showing up and communicating differently is actually helping my partner to feel safe to change, or is actually helping my partner feel less anxious or less defensive because I'm not full of anxiety all the time. And it will shift the relationship. I can never say I don't have a crystal ball if it's going to be
Mm.
improved or if it's going to be, wow, this person just really isn't able to give me what I'm looking for in a relationship. And maybe it's time for me to move on. I can't predict, but what I do know is that when we're really like radically focusing on our self-care and showing up in our relationships in mature, healthy ways, things will change.
For sure, for sure. And it's not always, you don't always get what you think you should have. You get when what you need when you continue to do your work. So it's like you can stay in the arena, and as when I was ready to commit to my fiance because of my wounding, I was really scared, and I had to seek out some support from a relationship psychotherapist, and he taught me about the aspect of there's like these circles, right? So there's me, there's a circle. There's my
Mm-hmm.
fiance or now fiance as a circle, and then above that is the circle with the R in the middle, which is for the
Mm-hmm.
relationship. And when we focus on ourselves, and your partner's responsibility is to focus on themselves, right? We all have our own dreams, our own aspirations. Mike, as myself, I have my own things I want to do, and Evie has her life and who she wants to become and her dreams, and we can both enjoy these together, and we can take care of the relationship, this partnership. And that was a really beautiful way for me to see it. And I think a lot of the times is these circles get overlapped, and that codependency happens, or that extreme people pleasing. And that's a great little thing you bring up here, because so many people in recovery, you hear that term a lot, people pleaser. I always thought people pleasing was kind of an adaptive response for people's needs not being met, and them having to think that they, it was beneficial in some way for them to, continue to support another person. Not to say that that's not a good thing, but at the expense of their own needs. Maybe they didn't know how to, uh, nurture themselves in a particular way, or weren't taught that as a child. So maybe can you just talk a little bit about people pleasing, where you think that comes from?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it on the head. Any relationship pattern or kind of automatic response or reaction that we're seeing in ourselves in our relationships that we don't feel good about, that we feel we'd like to change, but we feel stuck, like it's so automatic and ingrained. It's because it is, right? Like we have, um, at some point in childhood, those things kept us safe, they helped us survive, and now we've like laid down these neural pathways in our brain, right? And so it's just like this automatic like response that they just fire off when we get those signals of threat or danger, or potentially being rejected or abandoned, or somebody not approving of us, whatever it might be. And then our brain goes, oh, we know what to do in this situation. We're going to, go into that fawn response, right? Which is kind of like shutting down, collapsing on ourselves of what we want and our
Mm.
opinion, and we're sticking up for ourselves. And we're like, okay, yeah, it's fine. Like, sure, like let's do what you want. Or, um,
Yeah, then
you
we're
know,
then we're resenting then we're resenting down the road.
Right. And that's where, a lot of people come to work with me, like being aware of themselves, kind of not setting boundaries, or not sticking to boundaries that they've set, or people pleasing, or reacting, out of anger, or feeling very anxious and not being able to trust somebody that they're with, even though the partner's given them no reason not to trust them. But they have
Mm,
all of these like coping mechanisms, right? All of these strategies that so brilliantly protected them as children, like that anxiety, that fear, that fawning or people pleasing response, that control, that anger, all of those things like kept you safe at some
mm,
point. And but now those things are no longer serving you, right?
mm,
Like they've kind of taken you as far as they can go. But what we know is that to let go of those old survival patterns, like we have to feel safe. We have to feel safe to let them go and to bring on something new. And that's why often, like you said, getting support with a therapist, a coach, feeling like you're safe with somebody enough to let that go is so key.
absolutely, absolutely. A couple things you said that really struck out to me is, these patterns get wired in our neurobiology, and what we show up with is not necessarily what we're dealing with, but it's a transference from the past onto the present. So we can, for the listeners, it's very possible and often the case that we're these adults in these, 20-year-old bodies, 25, 30, 35, whatever, and even older. But we have a child that shows up to the relationship, and to, make that conscious and integrating that and healing that is the work. And that's the purpose, I think, of a partner, is to help heal us, help heal each other along the journey. So setting boundaries, like you said, when it comes to people pleasing, is very much needed. And I am a man of quotes, if you haven't been able to
Mhm.
tell already. And one that I really love is learn to say yes without resentment and no without guilt. And that one has
Mhm.
always spoken to me, because early, when we don't have boundaries and shit's all over the place, we don't know how to say yes and still honor our feelings. Sometimes we don't know how to say no without getting pissed off or whatever the case may be and feel bad. So this is a process, and to it's very difficult for us to heal the unconscious by ourselves. Like myself, Cassandra, we didn't just discover this on our own. We I'll speak for myself. I've invested in my healing. I know Cassandra has too.
Mhm.
We've gone to and shown up to the sessions. We've practiced it in our relationship, and now we teach it. To some degree, Cassandra specifically about relationships. So it's really beautiful. And you said we have to feel safe. And I want to share just a little aha moment I've had in the last handful of years. And maybe some of the listeners can identify with this or not. Is when I got sober in a 12-step fellowship to myself. And and this has nothing, I'm not saying anything negative about females in their recovery. But for me, I knew I wasn't going to date, or let's just say, I wasn't going to date long term a girl in recovery. And I never knew really why at the time, but I just I never felt safe enough. And why I didn't feel safe is because my mom was an alcoholic.
Mm.
My mom drank, but it took me years to really see that I didn't feel safe enough to date another woman in recovery, because I didn't want that same pain potentially to be inflicted, upon me again in case the person relapsed, or whatever the case may be. So I think it's so interesting now that I look back at it. And once again, like I say, we're all beautiful people in recovery. But for me, I needed to feel really, really safe. And for the men, a lot of the men that come and see me, what I say to them is I say, hey, bro, like the first thing you need when it comes to being in a relationship with a woman is you need to feel safe with a girl. Like a lot of us guys, we have this idea, and we're men, and
Mhm.
we're looking at the figures, and we're looking at the curves and the attraction and all that, and yet I would say the most important thing, especially if you have a history of trauma, is to find a partner that you feel safe with. Of course, physical attraction and beauty is definitely beneficial, But as a trauma survivor, feeling safe is imperative to growing and healing in a particular relationship. But Cassandra, what you had to say about that was really beautiful, and thank you. And I want to ask you, because I know many of my clients have suffered with this pattern, I have suffered with this pattern, is many of us stay in a relationship way longer than we should have. Can you speak for this pattern and how to address it for people who may be listening who feel that they're stuck and they can't leave their current relationship? I know every situation varies, but maybe just kind of like the theme of staying in a relationship much longer than you probably need to.
Yeah, so I can speak to this from personal experience too. You know, the first time I tried to leave my ex-husband was in 2010, and then I didn't actually end up leaving till 2015. And I knew even before 2010, right? Like I knew before we got married in 2007 that it probably wasn't the right relationship. So but what kept me stuck again was there was some trauma bonding there because of the emotional abuse. Um, there was a lot of fear, right? And not a lot of like trust in myself and that I could do it on my own and I could make it on my own. A lot of cultural programming for me. Like I have to also acknowledge that with like getting divorced and you just stay no matter what.
Mm.
But I really think at the root of it is just that relationship dynamic was what I was so familiar with. I He and I had a relationship like I was the mom and he was my teenage son, you know, and I got to be quote unquote like in control. Well, it felt that way, but it wasn't. Um, what I got to be is that parentified caregiver, just like I was since I was 10 years old with my dad.
Mm.
And it didn't feel good. I wasn't happy, but it's like what I knew. And I honestly couldn't even imagine like being with somebody and it being any better. Because when we're traumatized, it impacts a part of our brain that even enables us to imagine or visualize anything other than what we've always known. And to the nervous system, same is safe and different is dangerous. And to my primal brain, that what I learned for most of my life was calling the shots, you know, because when you're in that fight, flight, or freeze state, right? Like that primal or reptile brain is kind of mostly in the driver's seat. That part of the brain doesn't care if you're living your best life. That part of the brain doesn't care that you're, you know, in this soul fulfilling, you know, twin flame relationship. Like all that part of the brain cares about is that you're, you know, alive. That part of the brain to me, that meme, I don't know if you've seen that meme. It's like, but did you die?
Mm.
That's like the meme for this part of the brain. It's like, yeah, you're not happy. Yeah, it's sucking, you know, your soul, you're dying a little bit in every side inside every day. But you have a roof over your head, your needs are being met, like
Mm.
it's comfortable, you're not dead. So let's just keep doing this. Cool. Okay. And that is so powerful that our drive to survive, right?
Yeah.
It's like human instinct. So I'm going to thank that part of my brain that worked so hard to do what it thought it needed to do to keep me alive by keeping me stuck in that relationship. And I too, you know, got sober in 12 step. And I've, like you, since then branched out and get a lot of support and spiritual growth in a lot of other ways as well.
Mm.
And I, you know, unfortunately was on this loop of talking to my 12 step sponsor for years about the same thing over and over. And I would get this relief of like, you know, venting and complaining about my husband to her, but then nothing changed. And I had really wished that I had gone and gotten, you know, quote unquote, outside help, actual therapist. It might have saved me a lot of years of being in that relationship. Um, because like just venting to a sponsor or a friend is not the same as getting that actual professional coaching or therapy. And that is something that, I talk about now to people in recovery of like, don't have so much pride and ego that you think like you're above getting that outside help. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. I can't emphasize that enough. Someone who's probably a couple $100,000 into their own journey myself, it really requires, us to go deeper and for us to kind of peel the layers. And I think recovery is just actually the beginning of the journey. So I'm really happy that you discovered that and actually realized that over time and offered that to yourself to get you to where you are today. And what would you say to maybe the people on the other side who have left the relationship because they know it's not right for them, but are having trouble being alone? Where can the fear of being alone turn toxic?
Mm, yeah. So if we're noticing that we are settling again, we are compromising our values. Um, we are just really putting up with some BS,
Mm-hmm.
that we know that we're better than, that we don't deserve. That might show that, again, you might need some support, some coaching, or some therapy to help you build that relationship with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
first and foremost. Because again, back to like what is a conscious relationship, it's two people coming in with some foundation of self-awareness and healing. Yes, healing is a lifelong journey. We're like never gonna reach the top, right? I mean, unless you become like an ascended master or something. But I think for me in this lifetime, the clouds aren't going to be parting, for me. And so it's a journey. But it's so important to have like this like foundation built, right? That you can like bring in to build on in the relationship.
Yeah, it's vital. It's vital. And going back to those circles I mentioned earlier, like the foundation individually, and then the other person, if you're in a relationship, has their foundation, and then that supports the foundation of the relationship. So that's beautiful. And one little area I want to explore with you before we wind the interview down is, can you speak a little bit about either attachment trauma or attachment theory, and share, maybe why knowing your attachment style, and for those that don't know what that is, maybe you can just explain briefly why knowing your attachment style is so important, and maybe knowing your partner's attachment style, and how it can be a real game changer when it comes to understanding each other and cultivating a deeper connection.
Cool. So attachment theory in psychology is essentially this theory about how you were cared for or attuned to, really shapes how you are in relationships when you grow up. So attunement means how you were, the quality of how you were seen, felt, and heard. So if somebody saw you, somebody felt you, so there was empathy, if you were listened to, and then if you were responded to, and responded to in a timely, consistent manner. So all of these elements, right, we want to think about when we think back to our early childhood, especially those first 3 years, even up to 6 years old, and what that was like. And again, some parents aren't out there thinking, oh man, I can't wait to like neglect my kid, you know, because what we also know is that a parent cannot attune to their child beyond the extent to they're attuned to themselves.
Okay, hold on, pause for a moment. That's
Yeah.
so crucial, right? So you can attune to your child, or you can only attune to your child as much as the ability you're attuned to within yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Can,
Yes.
can,
That's what
can
the. Mhm.
so can you maybe, so for the listeners out there, right? So this can be traumatizing for a little nervous system, but if you don't know it, then you won't really understand it. So just explain that a little bit for and how that might happen in a parent-child dynamic.
Sure. So if a parent, um, isn't attuned to themselves. So they don't have a relationship with themselves. They're not aware of their own emotions.
Mm.
They aren't, mindful, or don't have moments of presence where they're really feeling their bodies, right? And
Mm.
noticing when they're tense, or when their heart's beating fast, or when they're feeling angry or upset. They're not that's like being attuned to yourself, is being like self-aware, right?
Mm.
And if a parent, because usually of their own trauma, has doesn't have that relationship with themselves, they don't have the robustness in their nervous system to also extend that to other people, especially their children. So, an example is that if a parent like my mom is really, really self critical and hard on herself, and isn't very emotionally aware, it's pretty emotionally shut down. She's lives a lot in that shut down or dorsal vagal response, then that's going to impact the quality that she's able to be compassionate towards me versus critical, that she's able
Mm.
to have empathy, or even notice when I'm sad, or I'm frustrated, or having a bad day. So then what we had was me throwing these massive, enormous tantrums. These were like, my tantrums were legendary, where, they'd be at the mall and multiple heads would turn because I was just screaming and so dysregulated, or feeling emotionally out of control. And I had two parents, even though my dad was sober at the time, he has a lot of history of trauma. He's never healed, didn't have the capacity in themselves, either A, to catch it before it built up to that point, and intervene and soothe and calm me, right? Or once I got to that point of feeling so angry and frustrated that I'm exploding, right, to like share my needs, they weren't able to like calm me down.
Mm.
And they would share like, oh, I would just cry for like a whole hour car ride. I'd be crying. And I'm like, well, and I was such a difficult child. And it's like, there's no such thing as difficult children. I mean, yes, sometimes babies have colic, but it's more about the parent's ability, because the quality of how attuned they are to themselves, and how traumatized their nervous systems are, to care for the child. And this isn't to shame or guilt any parents that are listening. It's just to really underscore, if you, like me, were raised by parents who didn't attune to you, then we just have some extra work to do. I have three kids and a bonus child, right? And so if I want to be the best parent I can be, then to me it is a necessity. It is mandatory that I invest in myself and get therapy and do somatic work, right? To like heal these things, because my kids are priceless and they deserve it.
Mm. Mm. Beautifully said. And yes, this isn't a conversation or a topic to shame parents. We don't know what we don't know. And for parents that
Mm-hmm.
are listening out there, if you want to regulate your children, then the best way to do that is regulate yourself first, regulate the household. And for me, I can send you a picture if you want. When I was about 3 years old, with both middle fingers up, and yeah, seriously, I was like the defiant kid that was out of my mind. And I'm realizing today, from all this, trauma research and the work I've done, and healing my own work, trauma in childhood, is defiancy is because there's a lack of needs being met. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no bad kids. Or even,
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Porges says there's no bad responses. There's only adaptive responses. So, flipping out and causing a ruckus may be your child's way of saying, "Hey, mom, like, can you pay attention to me, or can you attune to me?" So
Mm-hmm.
that's really beautiful. I can relate so much. And as we wind down here, Cassandra, what one modality, therapy, or maybe even practice has brought you the most healing, and why?
Ooh. Um, oh my gosh. I
Take your
mean,
time.
yeah,
I'm sure
it's a
you've
good
done a few like me.
I have. And you know what? It's hard to say because my nervous system changes over time. And what
Okay,
I
maybe.
need at
Mm-hmm.
different time changes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Somatic work has been super powerful, and I'm working with actually EFT coach right now, which is a type of somatic work, because it incorporates like tapping and like being present and using our bodies. But really, like at the end of the day, I mean, I've had polyvagal interventions, but it's about the relationship. It's about the relationship that you have with your provider, because the person can have like the best type of therapy interventions, like EMDR, for example. But if you don't feel safe with the person, like it's not going to do much and you're wasting your money. So that's just so important, is just like to find someone that you, like you said, Mike, that you feel safe with.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can be, you might have to explore, like I like to say, go interview your therapist just as much as they may be interviewing you. Like, feel them out, get a sense for them. And there's many paths to healing. I like to say paths are many, recovery is one, therapies are many, healing is one. So there's many paths, and finding a safe provider, and finding someone you can trust, and finding someone you can grow with is really crucial. And as we wind things down here on this beautiful interview, or I should say, where can people find you? How can they contact you? And also, I want to mention you're on a summit. I saw some advertisement on a summit. Maybe you want to just share a little bit about your work, where they can find you, maybe the summit, and all that good stuff.
Sure. So I am one of 25 speakers on the Vibrant Mama Summit coming out at the end of January. It's a free event. And you can also purchase a lifetime access pass. So Mike, I'll make sure I give you that link to post in the notes. I am hanging out on Instagram. I'm there pretty much every day, posting content and teaching and sharing at Cassandra_Solano. I'm also in Clubhouse a couple of days a week, teaching and connecting and answering questions. And I'm on Clubhouse at Cassandra Solano, no underscore there. And you can check out my offerings on my website, CassandraSolano.com. I have I don't know when this is going to air, but I do have a free workshop coming up in a week. And then I also have a group program starting in February. And I'll be having some one-on-one spots opening up later in the spring. So check me out. I'd love to connect with you. Join me at Clubhouse or on a live on Instagram. I'm happy to engage and answer questions. And I also have a free handout, Mike, on attachment styles. So maybe I'll give you that link to share, because I didn't get to go too much into the details on that. But I think it's really important for folks to understand their attachment styles, so that guide will help them figure out kind of which one they are. And then it has some tips for how to start healing.
For sure. I would love to share that handout with the listeners, and I will post all these links in the show notes for everyone to check out. And please, 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 if you're struggling in a relationship, if you're in recovery or not in recovery, Cassandra is a really, really valuable resource, practitioner, and a wonderful person on the path who can support you. So, Cassandra, I want to say thank you for joining us today on the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast, and may you be well. I don't know about you, but I feel that was an enlightening conversation on relationship. I find it so beneficial when we do our deep work, and people like Cassandra help normalize many of the patterns and responses that we act out, and that there's a reason for them. When we do our deep trauma work and become more conscious around them, we can open to different choices and possibilities in the present moment. I am definitely a living, breathing example after doing a lot of my deep trauma work and relationship work, and being in a very happy, contented, conscious relationship with my partner Evie for over 7 years now. And wow, now that I think about it, yes, 7 years. What a trip. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to drop a comment or share it with someone who may need to hear it as well. We're all in this to support one another on the journey, and it would be greatly appreciated for you to share this message with someone else who needs to hear it. Also, I want to let everyone know I am accepting new clients for my one-on-one Healing Beyond Recovery coaching program, where I take a trauma-informed, integrative approach to supporting you to thrive in your life in recovery. I believe it's your birthright to feel comfortable in your own skin, to access the present moment, and to thrive in relationships. You can learn more about it and even schedule a complimentary discovery call with me today by clicking Apply Now on my website at www.mikegovoni.com, or you can also go to my Instagram page and click the link in my bio. Again, I want to thank you for listening to today's episode, and remember, you can heal no matter what your story may be.